Hello, geometry students. We are starting chapter 11 today, which are going to be working with area and volume and surface area. So we're starting with a warm-up, exploration 1 and 2 in your student journal on pages 314 to 315. So go ahead and get your journal out. Again, the answers to the journal pages can be found in the student journal notes folder in Schoology for chapter 11. Helpful hint on doing exploration 1, you are asked to find the length of each gray circular arc. So one thing you might want to think about if you're looking at an arc is what part of the circumference is taken up by that arc. So on A, it says the entire circle. Well, if you're trying to find the distance around an entire circle, you'd use circumference. When you get to parts B, C, and D, you're going to take whatever that circumference is and multiply it times that fraction they give you. You're also going to use circumference to answer exploration 2. So go ahead and pause the video, try those problems, and you can check your work with the answers in the student journal notes folder. All right, let's go ahead and continue. We have some vocabulary for this chapter. Circumference, hopefully most of you know that already. It's the distance around a circle. Arc length, that is, opposed to the degree measure of an arc. Arc length is part of the circumference, right? It's a portion of the circumference. We have a new unit of measure in this chapter called a radian. It is the standard unit of measure of an angle. It's equal to an angle at the center of a circle whose arc is equal to the length of a radius. So if you remember, we had in the last chapter, we had degree measures of arcs, and that was equal to the measure of the central angle. But now we're going to have radians. You're going to see radians more and more as you progress through your math classes. By the time you get to calculus, you'll see radians only. You will not see degrees. Pre-calc, you'll see a little of both. Some work with degrees and some work with radians. Some important concepts you need to know today. Circumference, hopefully you remember the formula for the circumference of a circle. We have 2 of them actually. The first uses the radius, so circumference is equal to 2 times pi times the radius. Or since 2 radius equal 1 diameter, you will also see the circumference written as pi times diameter. We're going to be calculating arc length today. I like to use a proportion to set this up. If you remember when we were doing similar triangles, I like to use proportions a lot, and you guys were like, oh, I did this a different way. You're going to have the same thing in this chapter. I like to use a proportion because then it just keeps things in order. There's no question about, oh, is this going top or bottom? Just remember that it's always arc length, which is part of the circumference, over the circumference, and that would be equal to the measure of the arc over 360. All right, so degree measure over 360 equals arc length over circumference. And you can solve that proportion by cross multiplying, right? Remember we cross multiplied and solved for a missing variable when we were doing this with similar triangles. You're going to need to be able to convert between degrees and radians today. Most of your calculators will already do this calculation for you. You'll see a little radians to degrees key with a little arrow, or you might see radians or degrees to radians and so forth. But I do want you to be able to calculate them using these formulas. If I am going from degrees to radians, my answer needs to contain pi. So I take my degree measure, I multiply by pi over 180. So usually that involves simplifying these 2 numbers and leaving pi in my answer. If I'm going the other direction from radians to degrees, I'm going to eliminate the pi. So I'll have like some number of radians, like 7 pi radians equals 180 over pi. The pi's will cancel and I'll just multiply whatever that number is times 180. So let's go ahead and look at some extra practice on page 318. This first part, we're going to be working with the circumference formulas. Remember, there are 2 circumference formulas that we can use. The first is circumference is equal to pi times diameter, or we could have circumference is equal to 2 times pi times the radius. So depending on what we're given or what we're looking for, we can decide which of those 2 formulas to use. So number 1, it says, find the diameter of a circle where the circumference, this big C, is equal to 10 inches. So I'm trying to find diameter, so I'm going to use the formula that contains diameter. I know the circumference is equal to 10, so I'm going to write 10 is equal to pi times the diameter. Remember, circumference equals pi times diameter. Then I'm solving for the diameter, so I'm going to divide both sides by pi. And I'm going to get that the diameter is equal to, and you can do that calculation. They don't tell us what to round to here, so I just rounded to a couple decimal places. So if I do 10 divided by pi, I'm going to get about 3.18, or you could make it 3.2 if you want. And our unit is inches. Okay, number 2, this time it says, find the circumference of a circle where the radius is 3 centimeters. So this time I'm going to use the circumference formula that has the r in it. I'm solving for circumference, so c is equal to 2 times pi times 3, right? Our radius is 3. So our circumference is equal to, well, 2 times 3 is 6, so 6 pi. And if I round that, I get about 18.85. Okay, and the next one, this time we're trying to find the radius of a circle where their circumference is 8 feet. So again, I have a radius, or I'm looking for a radius, so I'm going to use the circumference formula that contains the r. I know the circumference is 8 feet, so I'm going to put 8 equals 2 times pi times r. And I'm solving for r, so I'm going to divide both sides by 2 pi. Be careful when you divide this on your calculator that you put the 2 pi in a parentheses, otherwise your calculator is only going to divide by 2 and then it's going to multiply by pi. So it only knows what you are entering in there. So if I do this, 8 divided by 2 pi, it's like 8 divided by 6 point something. I'm going to end up with about 1.27 feet. And I just realized I forgot to put units back here on number 2. This should have been centimeters here. All right, number 4, this time we're trying to find the circumference of a circle where the diameter is 2.4 meters. So circumference is equal to, go back, circumference on this last one here. Circumference is equal to pi times diameter. So pi times 2.4. And if we multiply that out, we're going to get that the circumference is about 7.54 meters. Okay, sorry. Hope you guys got numbers 1, 2, and 3 down before I glitched and ended up on the next slide. Remember, these notes are in the student journal if you need to go back and fill in. All right, number 5, this time we're trying to find an arc length, okay? So it's not asking us for the degree measure. We know from last chapter, the degree measure of this arc is the same as the central angle. So I know this arc here has a degree measure of 70. So I can put that in there. I'm actually going to use that in my proportion when I solve it. So again, remember it's arc length, which I'm just going to call, actually, you know what? I'm going to just make that an x because that's what I want. I'm going to write it as arc length x over the circumference is equal to degrees, and our degree measure there we know is 70 out of 360. Again, this is the formula that I gave you way back at the first part of the notes. Arc length over circumference equals degrees over 360. All right, so we don't know the arc length, so I put x here. But we can calculate the circumference. Remember, circumference is pi times diameter, or 2 times pi times the radius. So I can put here, I'm going to use the circumference formula that contains radius. So I'm going to put 2, maybe. I'm going to write 2 times pi times the radius, which is 3. And I know that has to equal 70 over 360. So it's always like part over whole equals part over whole. So arc length is part of the circle over the entire circumference of a circle equals the degrees out of 360. So we're going to cross multiply here again. So we get 360x equals, and on this side I'm going to multiply all this together. So 2 times 3 is 6 times pi times 70. All right, I'm going to simplify. I get 360x equals 420 pi. Okay, I'm solving for x. And so I want to get that x is going to be equal to, I'm going to divide both sides by 360. I'm going to have 420 pi divided by 360, right? I had to get x all by itself on the left. So if I do that calculation, I get that x, which is the arc length, is going to be about 3.67 inches. So notice that's telling me how far it is along this arc. Like if I were to walk along this arc from A to C, not how many degrees it is, I know it's 70 degrees. The question is, how long is it? How many inches long is this? And it's 3.67 inches long. All right, number 6, we're converting 60 degrees to radians. All right, so our formula, if we're converting from degrees to radians, I take 60 degrees and I multiply by, and again, this formula was given to you earlier in the notes. You can thumb back to your journal pages. So 60 degrees, I multiply by pi over 180. So if you're trying to go degrees to radians, multiply by pi over 180. So if I do that, this is like over 1, I get 60 pi over 180, or I can cross cancel. I'm going to switch some pens here so you can see what I'm doing. All right, so I know that 60 goes into 60 one time, and I know 60 goes into 180 3 times. So 60 degrees turns out to be pi over 3 radians. All right, number 7. This time I'm trying to convert 5 pi over 6 radians to degrees. So if I'm trying to go from radians to degrees, I take my radian measure, and this time I multiply by 180 over pi. All right, so again, I'm going to do some cross canceling. I can get rid of those units. So I can cross off the pi's. I can divide 6 into 180, so 6 goes into 6 once, and 6 goes into 180 30 times. So that's going to be equal to, I'm left with, if you look, I'm left with 5 times 30, so I should have 150 degrees. So again, if you're ending up going to degrees, you should have degrees in your answer. If you're going to radians, you should have radians in your answer, and a pi. All right, so that's it for today. This is the assignment. This assignment is also up on Schoology. You can do the Schoology version. That way it's automatically scored. You'll get 3 tries again to do these assignments if you're doing them in Schoology. So make sure you go through it, check what you got wrong, and redo it. So thanks for joining us. Good luck.